Rain lashed against the windshield like tiny fists, each drop a reminder of the chaos Claire had barely escaped. She gripped the steering wheel with both hands, knuckles white, her breath fogging the glass as she stared ahead. The shelter sign was barely visible through the downpour, just bold letters and flickering lights, surrounded by wet silence. She hadn't planned this stop. In fact, she had no idea why she'd taken this road at all. The divorce papers were still folded in the glove box, like a heavy secret hiding in plain sight. A dull ache pulsed in her chest, the kind that made your limbs heavy, like they didn't belong to you anymore. She could sit there forever. Let the rain wash the world away. But something, grief, madness, fate, was tugging at her. Claire pushed the door open and was instantly met with cold rain and sticky mud that sucked at her boots. She shivered, yanking her jacket tighter around her frame, her steps unsteady, hesitant. There was no real reason to go inside. Maybe it was boredom, or a need to escape the quiet apartment where her wedding photos still haunted the walls. Maybe it was just the strange magnetism of broken things, drawn to each other like splintered glass. She didn't know what she was looking for, only that she was looking for something. And she'd just taken the first step toward it. The door creaked as she entered, the sound swallowed by a hollow silence. The receptionist barely looked up. Claire offered no words, just a nod, and walked slowly down the dim corridor. Empty kennels lined the walls, their metal gates swinging slightly with the breeze from a ceiling fan. The walls were faded, the floor scuffed. This place had known sadness. Her footsteps echoed. Each kennel she passed mirrored some empty part of herself. Hollow, ignored, waiting for something that might never come back. The quiet wasn't comforting. It was familiar. It wrapped around her like an old coat. Heavy, worn, but known. Claire almost turned back until she reached the last kennel. There he was, a large German shepherd, coat dusted with gray, sitting perfectly still. His eyes, amber and ancient, didn't flinch. They didn't search, they knew. She stopped in her tracks. He didn't bark, didn't move, didn't pace like the others, just watched. And in that gaze was something unnerving, not fear, not aggression, something deeper. Recognition. She blinked, unsure if she was imagining it. Her heartbeat quickened. Something about him unsettled her, like he saw past the mask she wore for the world. Like he'd seen broken people before and wasn't afraid of them. His silence spoke louder than a howl. He wasn't just waiting for a home, he was waiting for her. The knot in Claire's throat thickened, her breath catching. She couldn't move, couldn't speak. Her past clashed with the present in that still hallway, and this dog, this stranger, was somehow the center of it all. Fear, maybe, grief, always. But guilt, that's what dug deepest. Guilt for the things she couldn't fix, the people she couldn't hold on to, the love that had slipped through her fingers. His amber eyes didn't judge, they didn't pity, they simply held her there, quiet, present, seen. And for the first time in months, Claire didn't want to run from what she felt. She finally broke eye contact and glanced at the metal tag wired to the kennel door. Max, 5 years old, not adopted. The words were simple, matter of fact, but they landed like a weight in her chest. Not adopted, passed over, left behind, like someone had deemed him unworthy. She swallowed hard. There was something brutal in that simplicity. A name, a number, and a label that spoke volumes. It wasn't just his story, it was hers too. Claire lowered herself slowly, knees trembling. The shelter floor was cold against her palms as she steadied herself. Max stood still. Then, with surprising grace, he took one step forward. Just one. His head tilted slightly, his ears perked, and something flickered in his eyes. Curiosity? Hope? Her heart thudded. Was this really happening? Was she really here? She didn't dare reach out, afraid she might break the spell. But she stayed there, breathing, waiting. And so did he. Two strangers, meeting in the wreckage. She hadn't planned for this, didn't want another responsibility, another goodbye. But as Max watched her with quiet certainty, Claire felt the smallest crack in her armor begin to shift. Maybe this wasn't about finding something. Maybe it was about being found. And maybe, just maybe, Max had been waiting all along. The hallway reeked faintly of bleach and resignation. Claire's voice cut through the silence, fragile and uncertain, as she nodded toward the last occupied kennel. Her eyes were drawn to the unmoving silhouette inside, coiled like a shadow, silent, unbothered by the barking chorus around him. "Why is he still here?" she asked, the words brittle, not out of interest but frustration. She had wandered into the shelter hoping to feel nothing, to distract herself with the noise and chaos, but this dog's stillness unnerved her. It was too calm, too quiet, almost patient. She looked away quickly, arms folded tight, as if afraid her own question had cracked something inside her she didn't want to feel again. Greta stood at her side now, eyes heavy with a knowing weariness. She didn't look at Claire, just stared down the row of kennels, as if the walls themselves carried weight. "That's Ranger," she murmured. "Been here longer than any of them." Her tone wasn't casual. It carried reverence and a kind of warning, like she was naming a ghost, not a dog. Claire turned her head, curiosity creeping through the cracks she was trying to keep sealed. "Longer than the others?" Greta nodded slowly. "He doesn't bark, doesn't whine, just watches." Claire's gaze drifted back to the kennel, where those golden eyes were locked on hers, unblinking. Greta's voice dropped further, the air thickening with something unspoken. "He was found at a crime scene, house in the woods. First responders came in, and there he was, sitting right by the door. Blood on his fur, wouldn't move, wouldn't let anyone near the room." Claire blinked, the words landing heavier than she expected. "Was he involved?" Greta shook her head. "No one thinks so. There was a woman inside, deceased. But there he sat, guarding her like it was his duty." Claire's breath caught. The idea of a dog staying behind after such horror, it felt too heavy, too raw. Greta added, "Took hours to coax him out. But even after they did, he wouldn't stop looking back. He had no name, no tags, no chip," Greta continued. "No one ever came asking. It was like he belonged to no one, and yet he stayed." Claire's eyes softened, though her arms remained crossed like armor. She'd met people like that, lost souls with no place to go, but who couldn't let go of what they'd lost. "He just laid by that door for days after," Greta said. "Even after being brought here, refused food at first, didn't react to anyone." Claire's throat tightened. It was the kind of loyalty that hurt to witness, devotion even after death. Greta glanced over. "Some think he's still waiting for her." Without knowing why, Claire found herself walking forward, each step deliberate, like treading into a memory that didn't belong to her. Her heart felt like a locked box, but something about the stillness of Ranger's form. It pulled at the edges. No pity, not yet, just recognition. She paused a foot from the bars, lowering herself slightly to meet his gaze. "Hey," she whispered, voice unsure. "You don't look like the others." The Ranger didn't flinch, he didn't retreat. He simply blinked, eyes calm, as if he saw through her, past the coat, past the walls, right to the ache she kept hidden. The silence felt endless. Ranger remained perfectly still, his amber eyes locked onto hers like he was memorizing every flicker of her expression. Claire had always hated eye contact. It made her feel exposed, but she couldn't look away now. There was no menace in his stare, no fear, just presence. That kind of quiet that doesn't demand attention but earns it anyway. Her fingers twitched at her side. She didn't reach out. Something told her that would come later, if it came at all. But in that moment, the silence between them said more than words ever could. Claire exhaled hard, forcing herself to break the gaze. "I should go," she mumbled, backing away. The warmth she didn't expect to feel now chilled her. She had come here to escape her thoughts, not invite more in. Her footsteps echoed too loudly in the narrow hallway. The dogs barked, yelped, demanded, but none of it reached her. Only one stayed quiet. Only one watched her walk away. At the door, her hand gripped the cold metal handle. She hesitated, but pushed it open, determined to leave whatever that moment was behind. Just as the wind kissed her face through the open doorway, it came, a sound so faint she almost missed it. A soft, strained whine. She froze mid-step. The door creaked on its hinges. Behind her, the barking hadn't stopped, but this was different. This was meant for her. Slowly, her head turned. Ranger hadn't moved, still curled, still quiet, but his ears had perked, and his eyes, those golden, aching eyes, watched her with something dangerously close to hope. And for the first time in months, Claire didn't want to be alone. Claire's hand trembled slightly as she signed her name at the bottom of the adoption form. The pen scratched across the paper louder than it should have, echoing in the quiet shelter office. Ranger, the German shepherd with wary eyes and a scar running above one brow, sat motionless in the corner of the room. His eyes met hers briefly, then dropped to the floor. Claire hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing on her chest. Was she doing the right thing? This wasn't some impulse. She'd been searching for a companion, but the truth was, she was just as broken as the dog staring back at her. The shelter worker gently clipped the leash onto Ranger's collar. "He needs someone patient," she said softly. Claire took the leash with both hands. "Maybe we both do," she whispered, unsure who she was trying to convince, Ranger or herself. The old farmhouse creaked with every gust of wind. Claire lay awake, the sheets twisted around her legs, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Below, in the dim light of the living room, Ranger paced. Back and forth, his nails clicking softly on the wooden floor. He'd refused the bed she'd prepared, and instead posted himself by the window like a silent sentinel. Occasionally, he growled under his breath at things only he could sense. Ghosts of past hurt, perhaps. Claire peeked over the railing of the staircase, watching him stand motionless, his body rigid, ears perked toward the darkness outside. She felt helpless. Part of her wanted to call him up, to comfort him. But she knew better. Trust couldn't be forced. So she watched, her heart aching for the silent guard who didn't yet know he was safe. Days passed in a kind of quiet limbo. Claire moved through her routine, coffee in the morning, emails by noon, frozen dinners at night, while Ranger kept his distance, always nearby, but never close. He didn't bark, didn't whine, didn't even beg, just watched. When she spoke to him, his ears flicked, but his eyes never met hers. The house, once echoing with loneliness, now held the weight of two souls unsure how to reach each other. Sometimes she wondered if adopting him had been a mistake, but then some small voice inside reminded her. They weren't strangers by accident. They were just two beings learning how to be whole again. It was a small moment, but it caught Claire completely off guard. She walked from the kitchen toward the laundry room, coffee mug in hand. A soft padding sound followed behind her. She turned slowly. Ranger stood a few feet away, eyes calm but attentive. He didn't flinch, didn't bolt. Just stood there, as if to say, "I'm here." She walked to the next room, and he came, pausing at each doorway like a silent shadow. Claire didn't speak, didn't react. But inside, something shifted, like a locked door easing open a crack. For the first time, she didn't feel quite so alone. The nightmare was one Claire hadn't had in months. A flash of headlights, the deafening crunch of metal, screams that only she remembered. She woke up gasping, sheets damp with sweat, clutching her chest. The room was dark, still, but something was different. A soft breath, steady, close. She turned. Ranger lay beside her bed, head resting on his paws, eyes half open. He hadn't been there when she fell asleep. He didn't move or make a sound, just stayed there, grounded and calm, as if he'd known she needed something steady. Claire reached down, her hand hovering inches from his head. He didn't flinch, so she let her fingers gently touch the fur between his ears. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. For the first time since the accident, she felt like she could breathe again. It started with small steps. Morning walks along the wooded trail behind the house. Ranger kept his distance at first, leash loose, gaze alert. But Claire talked anyway, not loudly, just a quiet, steady stream of words about her morning coffee, her work, her dreams, and sometimes her fears. She didn't expect him to respond. She just needed to speak, and for once, to be heard without judgment. And Ranger, in his own way, listened. The rustle of leaves beneath their steps became a rhythm. The way he looked at her, no longer through her, but into her, gave her the courage to keep going. One morning, as they reached the old bridge by the stream, Claire stopped walking. Ranger stopped too, and sat beside her close enough that their shoulders brushed. She smiled through tears she didn't know she had. Maybe healing didn't come in big moments. Maybe it came in quiet walks, shared silences, and soft breaths in the woods. It happened on a Tuesday. They were halfway through their usual trail when a stranger's voice echoed behind them, loud, aggressive, a jogger shouting into his phone, unaware. Ranger froze. Then a low growl bubbled up from his chest. His body stiffened, head low, teeth barely bared. Claire's heart raced. "Ranger, it's okay," she whispered, stepping in front of him. But he didn't blink. His eyes locked on the stranger, every muscle ready to strike. The jogger passed without incident, giving them a wide berth. Still, the tension hung in the air like fog. Claire gripped the leash tighter. For the first time, she felt afraid, not of Ranger, but of the past he carried. What had he seen? What had he been through? The growl wasn't just instinct, it was memory. And in that moment, Claire realized love alone wouldn't be enough. She had to understand him too. That night, Claire sat on the edge of her bed, her fingers trembling around a cup of untouched tea. Ranger lay curled by the window, calm now, but distant. "What if I can't help him?" she murmured. "What if I'm not enough?" She felt the old, familiar fear rising, that she'd let someone down again, that she'd taken on more than she could handle. The silence between them felt louder than ever. She glanced over at Ranger, who lifted his head, meeting her eyes. For a brief moment, he didn't look lost. He looked seen. The next day, Claire sat at her laptop, searching phrases like rescue dog trauma, PTSD in dogs, and rebuilding trust. Each article told a piece of Ranger's story, a puzzle she was just beginning to understand. She learned about body language, triggers, patience over punishment. More than anything, she learned to observe. Really observe. That night, she sat beside Ranger on the living room floor. She didn't speak, didn't reach out, just sat quietly, letting the silence speak for both of them. Eventually, he sighed, a deep, weary exhale, and leaned slightly against her leg. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't wipe them away. In that quiet moment, she wasn't his savior. She was just there, and that was the first thing he truly needed. Time passed. Not in leaps, but in inches. The Ranger no longer paced at night. He began to wag his tail, not wildly, but gently, when Claire came home. She, too, changed, laughed more, slept better, talked to friends again. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset bleed across the horizon, Claire whispered, "You saved me, you know." Ranger rested his head on her lap. Their scars hadn't vanished, but they no longer defined them. Instead, they became part of a shared story, of survival, of trust, of quiet healing. Two broken hearts, learning, slowly, patiently, to beat in rhythm again. And somewhere in the silence, in the spaces between words and wagging tails, a bond was forged. Not perfect, not instant, but real, unshakable, and worth every uncertain step they'd taken to find it. The air in the farmhouse was heavy with silence, save for the rhythmic ticking of the old clock in the corner. Claire sat, her mind still reeling from the strange sensation that had clung to her all evening. Ranger, her loyal German shepherd, was pacing nervously, his body stiff, ears flicking toward the front door. Then, from deep within the house, a low growl reverberated, sharp and ominous. Claire's heart skipped a beat. "What is it, boy?" she whispered, her voice barely a breath. Ranger's amber eyes locked onto hers for a brief moment. Then he turned his gaze back to the door, his growl deepening in warning. Something was out there, something that had set him on edge. Claire moved cautiously toward the living room window, her footsteps muted on the hardwood floor. She pulled back the curtain just enough to peer outside, her breath catching in her throat as she saw him. There, standing motionless near the edge of the woods, was a man. His figure was partially obscured by the trees, but his eyes, dark, cold, were locked onto the house. Claire's pulse quickened as the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. The man didn't move. He didn't blink. He just stared. Ranger's growls intensified, his entire body trembling with the force of his alarm. Claire's throat tightened. She didn't know why, but something about this man felt wrong. Something about him made her stomach twist into knots. Claire stepped back from the window, her breath coming out in shallow bursts. The chill that had settled in her chest earlier now crept through her limbs. This wasn't just any trespasser. She could feel it in her bones. This man, this figure in the dark, was not just a threat. He was a piece of Ranger's past. Claire's mind raced, trying to place him, but all she could feel was the deep sense of danger that radiated from the very core of her dog. Ranger was more than just a dog. He was her protector, her confidant, and now this strange man was forcing him into a battle with his own memories. "Stay here, Ranger," she whispered, though she knew it was futile. Ranger's protective instincts were fierce, and whatever this man represented, Claire was terrified it was more than she could handle alone. The sheriff arrived shortly after Claire had made the call, his face grim, eyes shadowed with an understanding Claire didn't quite grasp. He wasted no time in confirming her suspicions. "The man outside, he matches the description of someone involved in an old case," Sheriff Daniels said, his voice tight. "A home invasion, about 3 years ago. The dog, he was a German shepherd, just like your boy, was found beside the woman's body, refusing to leave her side. The man was never caught, but he left a trail of pain in his wake. Claire's hand shook as she held the sheriff's file, her eyes tracing the mugshot of the man standing in front of her house. It was him. The terror, the evil in his eyes, it was the same. And now, that same man was out there again, lurking in the shadows. The room seemed to close in on Claire as the sheriff's words echoed in her mind. Her gaze shifted to Ranger, who was sitting by the door, his body tense but his eyes soft, as though he knew the gravity of the situation. Claire's chest tightened, her breath hitching. She understood now. The Ranger wasn't just reacting out of instinct. He was reliving his past, a past where he had tried and failed to protect someone. He had been her protector once, and now he was here, guarding her from the same nightmare. A tear slid down her cheek as she looked at him. "I'm sorry, Ranger," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I never knew, but I know now. I'll help you face this, I swear I will." The bond they shared was deep. He had saved her once from her own darkness, and now it was her turn to save him. As night fell, the atmosphere grew heavier, suffocating with impending dread. Claire's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the clock tick ever closer to midnight. The silence outside had turned unnerving. Ranger's ears were pinned back, his eyes locked on the door with an intensity that sent shivers through her. Suddenly, the silence was shattered. A loud crash echoed from the direction of the front door. Claire's blood ran cold. The man, he had broken in. With nowhere to go, Claire scrambled, panic flooding her thoughts. The house was old, with creaky floors and narrow hallways. The intruder knew exactly how to use the darkness to his advantage. As she backed into a corner, she could hear his footsteps, slow and deliberate, drawing closer. She was cornered. There was no escape. Without warning, a low growl rumbled in Ranger's throat. His muscles coiled, ready to spring. And then, with a deafening roar, he lunged. Claire gasped as the struggle erupted in front of her. Ranger and the intruder collided with ferocity, teeth snapping, claws digging into flesh. Ranger was relentless, his protective instincts taking over. The man, stunned by the sudden attack, staggered back. But Ranger was undeterred. He wasn't just fighting for survival, he was fighting for her. With every ounce of strength, Ranger tore into the man, pushing him back, ensuring that Claire was safe. The man retaliated, but Ranger never faltered. In that moment, Claire saw not just a dog, but a warrior, a defender willing to sacrifice everything to protect the one he loved. The sound of sirens grew louder, but it was too late. The damage had already been done. The man was subdued, arrested, but not before Ranger had been badly wounded. Claire rushed to his side, her hands trembling as she tried to stop the blood from flowing. "Hold on, boy. Please, hold on," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Ranger's breathing was shallow, but his eyes, those eyes, were locked onto hers. Despite the pain, despite the blood, he was still there. He had given everything to protect her. The police took the intruder away, but all Claire could think of was Ranger. "I couldn't do this without you," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You saved me. You gave me everything." Ranger's growls intensified, his entire body trembling with the force of his alarm. Claire's throat tightened. She didn't know why, but something about this man felt wrong. Something about him made her stomach twist into knots. Claire stepped back from the window, her breath coming out in shallow bursts. The chill that had settled in her chest earlier now crept through her limbs. This wasn't just any trespasser. She could feel it in her bones. This man, this figure in the dark, was not just a threat. He was a piece of Ranger's past. Claire's mind raced, trying to place him, but all she could feel was the deep sense of danger that radiated from the very core of her dog. Ranger was more than just a dog. He was her protector, her confidant, and now this strange man was forcing him into a battle with his own memories. "Stay here, Ranger," she whispered, though she knew it was futile. Ranger's protective instincts were fierce, and whatever this man represented, Claire was terrified it was more than she could handle alone. The sheriff arrived shortly after Claire had made the call, his face grim, eyes shadowed with an understanding Claire didn't quite grasp. He wasted no time in confirming her suspicions. "The man outside, he matches the description of someone involved in an old case," Sheriff Daniels said, his voice tight. "A home invasion, about 3 years ago. The dog, he was a German shepherd just like your boy, was found beside the woman's body, refusing to leave her side. The man was never caught, but he left a trail of pain in his wake." Claire's hand shook as she held the sheriff's file, her eyes tracing the mugshot of the man standing in front of her house. It was him. The terror, the evil in his eyes, it was the same. And now, that same man was out there again, lurking in the shadows. The room seemed to close in on Claire as the sheriff's words echoed in her mind. Her gaze shifted to Ranger, who was sitting by the door, his body tense but his eyes soft, as though he knew the gravity of the situation. Claire's chest tightened, her breath hitching. She understood now. The Ranger wasn't just reacting out of instinct. He was reliving his past. A past where he had tried and failed to protect someone. He had been her protector once, and now he was here, guarding her from the same nightmare. A tear slid down her cheek as she looked at him. "I'm sorry, Ranger," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I never knew. But I know now. I'll help you face this. I swear I will." The bond they shared was deep. He had saved her once from her own darkness, and now it was her turn to save him. As night fell, the atmosphere grew heavier, suffocating with impending dread. Claire's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the clock tick ever closer to midnight. The silence outside had turned unnerving. Ranger's ears were pinned back, his eyes locked on the door with an intensity that sent shivers through her. Suddenly, the silence was shattered. A loud crash echoed from the direction of the front door. Claire's blood ran cold. The man, he had broken in. With nowhere to go, Claire scrambled, panic flooding her thoughts. The house was old, with creaky floors and narrow hallways. The intruder knew exactly how to use the darkness to his advantage. As she backed into a corner, she could hear his footsteps, slow and deliberate, drawing closer. She was cornered. There was no escape. Without warning, a low growl rumbled in Ranger's throat. His muscles coiled, ready to spring, and then, with a deafening roar, he lunged. Claire gasped as the struggle erupted in front of her. Ranger and the intruder collided with ferocity, teeth snapping, claws digging into flesh. Ranger was relentless, his protective instincts taking over. The man, stunned by the sudden attack, staggered back. But Ranger was undeterred. He wasn't just fighting for survival, he was fighting for her. With every ounce of strength, Ranger tore into the man, pushing him back, ensuring that Claire was safe. The man retaliated, but Ranger never faltered. In that moment, Claire saw not just a dog, but a warrior. A defender willing to sacrifice everything to protect the one he loved. The sound of sirens grew louder, but it was too late. The damage had already been done. The man was subdued, arrested, but not before Ranger had been badly wounded. Claire rushed to his side, her hands trembling as she tried to stop the blood from flowing. "Hold on, boy, please hold on," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Ranger's breathing was shallow, but his eyes, those eyes were locked onto hers. Despite the pain, despite the blood, he was still there. He had given everything to protect her. The police took the intruder away, but all Claire could think of was Ranger. "I couldn't do this without you," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You saved me. You gave me everything." As the adrenaline of the night slowly wore off, Claire sat on the floor, cradling Ranger's head in her lap. She could feel the weight of his body growing heavier, but she couldn't bring herself to leave him. "You're not just a dog," she whispered, her voice thick with gratitude and sorrow. "You're my hero. You always were." The floodgates of her emotions broke open. The fear, the relief, the overwhelming gratitude. It all came pouring out. And in that moment she realized that Ranger wasn't just her protector. He was the very reason she had found the strength to live again. And he had just given her everything. As the sun began to rise, casting its soft light across the room, Claire looked down at Ranger, his head resting in her lap. His breathing had steadied, though he was still weak. In that moment, Claire understood something she had never truly realized before. Ranger wasn't just a dog, he was her family, her salvation. The bond they shared wasn't just one of companionship, it was one of survival, of love, of mutual healing. He had saved her life, but in doing so he had also saved her soul. The Ranger wasn't just a dog, he was her hero. Ranger lay motionless, his breathing steady but labored, as the beeping of the heart monitor softly punctuated the quiet room. His once vibrant coat was now matted with patches of fur, a stark reminder of the battle he'd fought to protect Claire. His body, though still, carried the echoes of his bravery. The town had rallied around him, each person offering a silent prayer or a moment of gratitude for the loyal German shepherd who had saved their neighbor. It had been days since the attack, but the whispers of his heroism filled every corner of the town. Ranger, unaware of his newfound fame, remained quietly in his bed, resting as though the weight of the world had finally been lifted from his shoulders. For Claire, each visit to the hospital was a delicate balance between hope and fear. She stroked his head gently, her fingers trembling as she whispered, "You're not alone, Ranger. You're my hero, my savior." His eyes fluttered open briefly, a soft, reassuring gaze that spoke volumes of his unspoken love and loyalty. The bond they shared was deeper than words, a quiet understanding of what had passed between them, the unshakable trust that had saved them both. The sun rose softly, casting golden light through the curtains of Claire's bedroom. For the first time in weeks, the warmth of the sun felt like a promise, a symbol of a new beginning. Claire stretched, a peaceful sigh escaping her lips as she watched the world wake up outside her window. The fear and anxiety that had once gripped her heart seemed to have loosened their hold. Her home, once a fortress of terror, had been transformed. It wasn't just the light that had changed, it was her. The weight of the past, though still there, didn't feel as crushing. She felt lighter, more hopeful. The house felt safe again, not just because it was empty of threats, but because she had learned to live with peace. She opened the curtains fully, letting the light flood the room. As she gazed out at the quiet morning, she knew that life was different now, and that the love and strength she had found in Ranger had changed everything for the better. It started with a knock at the door, a small, hesitant knock, followed by a soft voice on the other side. Claire opened the door to find Mrs. Franklin, the elderly woman who lived 2 houses down, standing with a basket of homemade cookies. I just wanted to say how sorry I am for what happened," Mrs. Franklin said, her eyes bright with concern. "And, well, thank you for keeping Ranger safe. He's a good dog, a brave one." The words felt like a balm to Claire's weary soul. A simple gesture, but one that spoke volumes. Over the following days, more neighbors came by, some with flowers, others with cards, and a few simply offering a kind word. They didn't just stop by to see Ranger's recovery. They stopped because they wanted to connect with Claire, to share in the story of what had happened. In those moments, Claire realized something important. She wasn't alone anymore. She had a community, a group of people who saw her and Ranger not as victims but as survivors, as heroes in their own right. And slowly, Claire felt herself letting down the walls she'd built around her heart. As days turned into weeks, Claire began to notice a subtle shift in herself. She was no longer a woman living in fear. Ranger's courage had sparked something inside her, a fire she hadn't realized had been smoldering beneath the surface. When she saw a flyer at the local coffee shop asking for volunteers at the animal shelter, something inside her stirred. She knew what she had to do. She had to give back, just as Ranger had given her a second chance at life. Her first day at the shelter was overwhelming, but in the best way possible. There were so many animals in need, so many lost souls looking for someone to trust. Claire saw in them the same fear and uncertainty she'd once felt. But now she had the tools to help. She had Ranger's strength to lean on, and she had learned how to listen, truly listen, to the animals and the people who cared for them. Slowly, she began to heal the broken parts of herself, her heart expanding as she helped others find peace and love. The work at the shelter wasn't easy. Each animal came with its own story, its own trauma. But Claire had something they needed: a soft touch, a patient ear, and a heart full of empathy. With each animal she helped, Claire began to see her own healing reflected in theirs. It wasn't immediate, but slowly, she watched as they came out of their shells, as they learned to trust again. She learned to read their eyes, to understand the silence between the words, and to find strength in their vulnerability. As Claire worked with the animals, her own pain started to fade. She had once felt broken, but now she felt whole again. The lessons she had learned from Ranger, patience, trust, love, were now guiding her as she worked with other animals, teaching them the same things she had learned from the loyal dog who had saved her life. One afternoon, Claire was at the shelter when she was approached by a therapist who ran a program for children with anxiety and trauma. "I've heard about Ranger," the therapist said, his eyes filled with quiet admiration. "I think he could help these kids. Would you be willing to bring him in for a few sessions?" The thought of Ranger working with children filled Claire's heart with pride. She agreed, and soon Ranger was walking through the halls of the therapy center, his gentle steps reassuring the children who were scared to speak or even make eye contact. Ranger's presence was like a balm to their souls. He didn't speak, but his silent strength conveyed everything they needed to hear. Slowly, the children began to open up, their fear melting away in his presence. Ranger, ever the protector, had become their guide. It was during one of these therapy walks that something extraordinary happened. A small girl, no older than 6, who had been mute for as long as anyone could remember, took a tentative step forward. Her hands trembled as she reached out and touched Ranger's fur. At first, it was just a light brush, but then she held on, and something miraculous happened. "Ranger," she whispered, her voice barely audible but steady. Claire froze, watching in awe as the little girl spoke for the first time in years. It was the power of Ranger's presence, his calm demeanor, that gave the child the courage to find her voice again. In that moment, Claire knew that the bond between Ranger and her was now spreading, touching lives in ways she never could have imagined. At the end of every day, Claire and Ranger would sit together on the porch. It was their quiet time to reflect, to soak in the peace they had fought so hard for. The sun would dip below the horizon, casting the sky in shades of gold and pink, and Claire would lean back, her head resting against Ranger's warm side. The world, in that moment, seemed perfect. Not because it was without pain, but because it had become whole. They had found peace in each other, in their love, and in their shared strength. One evening, as Claire looked out at the sunset, a smile tugged at the corners of her lips. It wasn't the kind of smile that came from perfection. No, it was the kind of smile that came from understanding, from knowing that life would never be perfect, but it could still be beautiful. Her life, once shattered, was now whole, and it had been made whole by the love of a dog who had been more than a pet, more than a companion. Ranger had been her savior, her guide, her strength, and in return she had learned to love, to heal, and to be whole again. And as she sat there with him, her hand resting on his fur, she realized that together they had created something truly beautiful, a bond that would never be broken. Claire stood by the window, watching the sunset over the town, her mind drifting back to the darkness she had lived through before Ranger came into her life. She thought of all the scars, the broken pieces of her heart that once felt so irreparably shattered. Just like Ranger, abandoned, lost, and forgotten. Yet they had both found light again. Together they had mended, one step at a time. "It's strange," she whispered to herself, "how something so broken can end up whole again." Ranger, lying at her feet, lifted his head slightly as if hearing her thoughts, his brown eyes locking with hers. Claire smiled, a small but genuine curve of her lips. "We were both lost, weren't we, boy?" she murmured, reaching down to scratch behind his ears. The weight of her words hung in the air. Two broken souls, finding strength in one another. Claire's thoughts shifted to Ranger's past, to the years he had spent in silence, abandoned and alone. She used to view the emotional scars he carried as something that made him fragile, something that marked him as a broken creature. But now she understood. Those years of neglect hadn't made him weak. They had made him gentle, kind, and patient. Ranger had learned to endure, to wait, and to love without expectations. His quiet strength was the wisdom of a dog who had been through darkness, yet still had so much to offer. Claire often marveled at the way he listened with his whole being, how he sensed her every emotion, and how he simply knew when to sit beside her and offer his silent companionship. Maybe it's the ones who have been forgotten that hold the most wisdom, Claire thought. The ones who've lived through pain, only to come out on the other side stronger. Healing wasn't a miracle for Claire. It wasn't a series of breakthrough moments or dramatic changes. No, it was a quiet, steady process that happened in the soft silence of her home, in the gentle presence of a dog who never asked for anything but her company. Ranger didn't heal her with grand gestures. He didn't speak words of comfort or provide answers. He simply sat beside her, his head resting on her lap as she cried, his fur soft under her fingers. And that, more than anything else, healed Claire. It wasn't therapy, it wasn't time. It was simply the act of being together, of sharing the burden of pain in silence. "I don't need miracles," she reflected, watching Ranger as he slept beside her. "I just needed you." Trust was never something Claire could give easily. She had been betrayed too many times, hurt too deeply. But Ranger taught her something profound. Trust is earned, not given. Slowly, gently, with presence. At first she wasn't sure. She watched him with suspicion, unsure if he could ever truly trust her. But as the days passed, his presence was a constant reminder that trust grows in small, quiet ways. It was in the way he would nudge her hand with his nose, seeking comfort. It was in the way he never rushed, never pushed, just stood by her side, offering only what was needed in the moment. And over time, trust grew, not because Claire had forced it, but because Ranger had earned it, one small act of kindness at a time. Looking back, Claire realized something she hadn't fully understood before. She thought she had saved Ranger, rescued him from the cold, the loneliness, the fear. But in truth, they had saved each other. Ranger had brought her comfort when the world felt too loud, too overwhelming. He had helped her find the courage to face another day, to step into the light after years of darkness. And in return, Claire had given him the love and care he had been denied for so long, restoring the dignity and warmth he had lost. Together, they had healed. Not in isolation, but as partners. They hadn't just survived their pain, they had overcome it. And in the process, they had built something far stronger than survival. They had built a life together. We didn't just survive, Claire thought, her hand resting on Ranger's head as he looked up at her. We saved each other.